I watched from behind the thick veil of a mourner's hat as my own casket was lowered into the ground. My heart pounded so hard I thought someone might hear it over the priest's somber words. In loving memory of Samuel Carter. May he rest in eternal peace. Peace. That was the last thing I felt. I was very much alive, crouching in the back row among the crowd of teary-eyed mourners. My best friend, Lucas, stood stiffly by my supposed widow, Claire, his jaw clenched so tight it could snap. My boss, Mr. Davenport, a man who once swore I was like family, scrolled through his phone, clearly impatient for this to be over. Then, the moment I had been waiting for, the gasps. "Who is that?" someone whispered. Gasps turned to murmurs. Mourners leaned in, their confusion thick in the air. Claire's face drained of color as she locked eyes with me. That was when I stepped forward, tugging off my hat, revealing my face to the stunned crowd. Surprise. A scream tore through the silence. The priest stumbled back. Claire's bouquet of lilies tumbled to the ground. Lucas looked like he'd seen a ghost, which, technically, he had. Then chaos erupted. If you had told me 2 weeks ago that I'd be planning my own funeral, I would have laughed in your face. But back then, I was just an ordinary man, stuck in a dead-end job, suffocating in a loveless marriage, and unknowingly standing at the edge of betrayal. It all started when I overheard my boss and Claire whispering in the office parking lot. "Once he's gone, we'll be free. And richer than ever," Claire murmured. My blood ran cold. They wanted me dead. And that's when the idea struck me. If they wanted me dead, I'd give them exactly what they wanted. But on my terms. I barely made it home that night. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost crashed my car into a stop sign. My wife, my boss, plotting my death like it was just another business deal. I couldn't believe it. But the evidence was right there. Claire's voice kept replaying in my head. "Once he's gone, we'll be free. And richer than ever." I knew exactly what that meant. I had a fat life insurance policy, one I had stupidly listed Claire as the sole beneficiary of. If I ended up in a ditch, she'd be swimming in millions. And if my boss was in on it too, that meant my job wasn't safe either. I was a walking, breathing paycheck, and they were just waiting to cash out. I wasn't about to let them win. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the dim glow of my laptop screen. How do you fake your own death? A morbid question, but one I was now deadly serious about. I spent hours researching, watching documentaries, reading crime stories, even diving into conspiracy forums. It was like planning the ultimate magic trick. I needed people to believe I was dead without actually dying. And then the perfect plan hit me. Step 1. I needed a body, or at least something convincing enough. I had an old hunting cabin deep in the woods, untouched for years. No cameras, no nosy neighbors. The perfect crime scene. If I could stage a car crash and fire, they'd assume my body was burned beyond recognition. Step 2. I needed to disappear before anyone got suspicious. So I started making subtle changes, paying off debts, withdrawing cash in small amounts, cutting back on personal interactions. I even left a few depressed messages on my phone, just in case someone checked. Step 3. I needed an inside man. I couldn't pull this off alone, so I turned to the only person I trusted, Lucas, my childhood best friend. The guy had been with me through everything, and if there was one person who hated Claire more than I did, it was him. When I told him the plan, he nearly dropped his beer. "Dude, are you insane? You want to fake your own death?" "Not just fake it," I said, leaning in. "I want to watch my own funeral." Lucas stared at me for a long moment. Then, his lips slowly curled into a grin. "I'm in." And that's when we got to work. The night before my death, Lucas and I stood on the edge of a dirt road, deep in the woods. The only light came from my car's headlights, casting long shadows over the abandoned hunting cabin. "Last chance to back out," Lucas muttered, tossing a cigarette to the ground. I exhaled slowly, gripping the jerrycan of gasoline in my hand. "If I back out now, I actually die. This is the only way." Lucas nodded. "Then let's make it convincing." We worked quickly. First, we planted my old watch and a few personal belongings inside the car, things they'd expect to find on a dead man. Then, Lucas took a baseball bat and went to town on the vehicle, shattering windows, denting the doors. "Gotta make it look like you lost control," he grunted. When the wreck looked convincing enough, we doused the entire car in gasoline. I pulled out a lighter. "You sure about this?" Lucas asked. I didn't answer. I just flicked the lighter. Whoosh. Flames roared to life, licking up the sides of the car. Within seconds, the fire spread, engulfing the seats, the dashboard, the cabin. Thick, black smoke curled into the night sky. There was no turning back now. "Time to disappear," I whispered. Lucas drove me out of town that night. By morning, I was officially off the grid. We had planned everything. Lucas would find the wreck and report it to the police. When they didn't find a body, Claire would assume I'd burned alive, and with no way to prove otherwise, the insurance payout would be hers. And then I would return, not as a corpse, but as a man with unfinished business. As we reached the outskirts of a small town where I'd be hiding, Lucas grinned. "Dude, I can't wait to see their faces at the funeral." Neither could I. 2 days later, I stood hidden in the back of St. Augustine Church, watching my own funeral unfold. The place was packed. Friends, co-workers, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were all here, dressed in black, whispering to one another in hushed voices. Claire sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Fake tears. I knew those well. Lucas sat beside her, playing his part, the grieving best friend. He had been the one to discover the wreckage and report it to the cops. Thanks to the heat of the fire, they couldn't find any remains, but with my belongings and the charred wreckage of my car, the conclusion was obvious. Samuel Carter was dead. The priest spoke about my life, my legacy, how I was taken too soon. I nearly snorted. The only thing taken from me was my dignity by my own wife and boss. And they thought they had won. Then Claire stood up to speak. "My husband was a good man," she began, her voice trembling. "Too perfect, too rehearsed." She sniffled, looking down at the folded piece of paper in her hands. She didn't love me enough to speak from the heart. As she continued, I scanned the crowd. Some people were actually crying. My mother clutched a rosary, her body shaking with grief. My old college roommate stared blankly ahead, his face pale. They were mourning me. They actually believed this. But I wasn't here for them. I was here for her. Claire took a deep breath. "Even though he's gone, I find comfort knowing he's watching over us." I smirked. "Oh, I was watching, all right." Then I stood up. Claire's eyes flickered toward me, and then froze. Her face went pale. Her hands started trembling. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People turned. Eyes widened. Lucas leaned forward, his expression carefully neutral. I took a slow step forward, removing my hat. And then, in a voice that cut through the silence like a blade, I spoke. Surprise. The moment my voice sliced through the air, the funeral descended into chaos. Claire stumbled backward, her face drained of all color. Her hands clutched her chest like she was about to pass out. Someone gasped. Another screamed. The priest dropped his Bible. The thud echoed through the church like a gavel, sealing their fate. Claire stammered, her lips trembling. Mr. Davenport, my boss-turned-murder conspirator, shot up from his seat, his chair screeching against the floor. His usual smugness was gone. Instead, his eyes darted around, like he was trying to figure out if he was hallucinating. I took another step forward, letting the wooden floor creak beneath my feet. Someone whispered, "It's his ghost." Good. I wanted them scared. I wanted them to feel the same gut-wrenching horror I had felt when I learned what they had planned for me. Don't come any closer," Claire screeched, her voice cracking. I tilted my head. "Why not, sweetheart? Afraid of your husband?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people were frozen. Others were pulling out their phones, filming, probably thinking this was some kind of sick prank. Claire shook her head violently. You're dead," she choked out. "You died. We saw the wreckage." I let out a soft chuckle. "Well, that's funny." I took another step. She flinched. "Because I don't feel dead." Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Then, from the back of the room, a voice. "That's not a ghost. That's Samuel." Heads turned. Lucas had stood up. He looked calm, but there was a glint in his eyes. Claire whirled toward him. "You knew." Oh, this was getting fun. I smiled. "Oh, he didn't just know. He helped me." Claire staggered. Her breathing was erratic, her eyes darting between Lucas and me. She was trying to process it, trying to figure out how her dead husband was standing right in front of her. Then, her fear twisted into something else. Rage. She gritted her teeth, her entire face twisting into a snarl. "You bastard." There it was. The real Claire. The mask had finally cracked. I folded my arms. "Well, sweetheart, if I'm a bastard." I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "What does that make you?" Her lips parted. For a split second, I saw it, pure panic. Then, boom. Claire lunged at me. Claire lunged at me. Her nails like claws aimed straight for my face. I barely had time to step back before she screamed like a banshee, swinging wildly. "You ruined everything," she shrieked, her voice raw with rage. The crowd gasped. Some scrambled out of their seats, knocking over chairs, while others watched in stunned horror. I caught her wrist before she could land a hit. "Ruined what, Claire?" I growled, tightening my grip. "The life insurance? Your plan to erase me? Or the fact that you got caught?" Her nostrils flared. She was breathing heavily, her whole body trembling, but not with grief, with pure, unfiltered rage. "Let go of me," she spat, struggling against my grip. "Gladly." I shoved her back. She stumbled, nearly tripping over her own heels. Lucas rushed forward and caught her before she fell. "Whoa, let's all just calm down, yeah?" he said, throwing me a warning glance. "Calm down?" "Oh, I was just getting started." Claire whipped around, eyes blazing. "He faked his own death. He's insane. He's a criminal." I laughed. A full, deep laugh. "I'm the criminal." I pointed at myself. Funny, because I'm not the one who plotted to kill my own husband. The room fell silent. Claire's face twitched. You have no proof," she stammered, her voice quieter now. I smirked. "Are you sure about that?" Her breath hitched. I saw it in her eyes, fear. Because she knew. She knew I had something. The guests started murmuring. People were looking at her differently now. Some even backed away like they didn't want to be associated with her. Mr. Davenport's face was pale. His hands gripped the back of a chair, so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Lucas cleared his throat. "All right, man. Maybe we should take this outside." But I wasn't done. I took out my phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. A recording began to play. Claire's voice. "Davenport, relax. Once the fire spreads, there won't be anything left of him. The insurance money will be wired to my account within weeks. We just need to make sure the cops don't ask too many questions." The room erupted. Claire's eyes went wide with terror. Davenport staggered back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The funeral had officially turned into a trial, and I was the judge, jury, and executioner. The room erupted into chaos. Gasps, shouts, murmurs of disbelief. Guests who had been mourning me just moments ago were now staring at Claire and Davenport like murderers, because that's exactly what they were. Claire's hands shook as she reached for my phone. "That's fake," she shrieked. You edited that. It's not real." I tilted my head. "You really want to go with that defense, sweetheart?" I tapped the phone screen again, and another recording played. Davenport's voice this time. "Make sure the wreckage looks convincing. The insurance company can't suspect a thing." Davenport froze. His face turned gray. The crowd turned on him. That can't be real," he stammered, his voice suddenly small. But it was real, and they all knew it. A woman in the back, one of Claire's so-called friends, gasped and stepped away. "Claire, tell me you didn't actually—" Her voice trailed off. More people backed away. Claire was breathing hard. Her perfect funeral facade was crumbling before my eyes. She looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw it, pure fear. Not annoyance, not manipulation. Fear. I took a slow step forward, my voice low, dangerous. "Tell me, Claire, what does it feel like?" She swallowed. What?" I leaned in. "To be buried alive." Davenport snapped out his trance and grabbed Claire's arm. "We need to leave. Now." He tried to pull her toward the exit, but I was faster. I blocked their path. "Oh no," I said, smiling. "The show's not over yet." Claire twisted in his grip. "Let me go," she shrieked, yanking her arm free. For a split second, I saw it. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was acting on pure panic. Her eyes darted around the church. She was looking for an escape. And that's when she did the one thing I didn't expect. She lunged for my mother. Claire lunged at my mother so fast no one had time to react. She grabbed her by the wrist, yanking her up from the pew. "Nobody move!" she shrieked, dragging my mother against her chest like a human shield. Gasps filled the room. I went rigid. My mother, the one person I had left in this world, was now in the hands of the woman who had plotted to kill me. Claire's nails dug into my mother's arm. "You gonna let me walk out of here?" she hissed. "Or I swear, I will make you regret it." My mother whimpered, her eyes wide. "Claire, please." The church fell silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Claire's breathing was ragged, her body trembling. She was cornered, desperate, but that made her even more dangerous. Davenport took a step back. "Claire, let's not." "Shut up," she snapped. Her grip tightened. I took a slow step forward, my hands raised. "Claire, let her go." My voice was calm, but my blood was boiling. She laughed, but it was hysterical. "Oh, now you want to play nice? Now?" After humiliating me in front of everyone, my jaw clenched. "You did this to yourself." Her eyes flashed. "No, you did this to me." She pulled my mother closer. "Now step aside, Samuel." I didn't move. I could feel every eye in the room on me. The guests were frozen, too afraid to interfere. Nobody wanted to set Claire off. Then Lucas moved. It happened fast. Lucas lunged from the side, grabbing Claire's wrist. She screamed. My mother jerked away. Claire spun around, wild, unhinged, her hands clawing at Lucas. And then her fingers curled around a candle stand. My eyes widened. Lucas moved, but it was too late. She swung. The heavy brass stand slammed into Lucas's head. A sickening crack. Lucas collapsed. The entire room erupted into chaos. People screamed. Some rushed toward him. Others scrambled away. Claire stood frozen, panting, gripping the bloodied candle stand. I stared at Lucas's motionless body, and in that moment, something inside me snapped. I lifted my eyes to Claire. She saw the change, and for the first time in her miserable, selfish life, she realized she was about to pay for everything. Lucas lay motionless on the church floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath his head. Claire staggered back, still gripping the candle stand, her face pale. She knew. She had just crossed the final line. I felt nothing but rage. My hands curled into fists. My vision blurred with red. "Claire," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You should start praying." She took a shaky step back. I didn't mean to." I lunged. She screamed, dropping the candle stand as she turned to run. But I was faster. I grabbed the back of her dress and yanked her to the floor. She landed hard, her head bouncing off the wooden surface. The church erupted in gasps. But I didn't care. I climbed on top of her, pinning her wrist to the floor. "You think you can just erase people when they don't fit into your perfect little life?" I growled, my face inches from hers. "You think you can kill me, take everything, and just move on?" She struggled beneath me, sobbing. Samuel, please." I pressed harder. "I trusted you." I spat. "I loved you, and you tried to bury me." Her sobs turned into screams. "Help me. Someone." But no one moved. The guests, the same people who had come here to mourn me, just watched. Some were frozen in shock. Others looked relieved. Even Mr. Davenport had backed away, his hands trembling. Claire was alone, and she finally knew what that felt like. Suddenly, police sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the stained glass windows. A voice boomed from outside. "This is the police. Everyone remain where you are." Claire's eyes widened. Her last chance. She turned her head toward Davenport, her voice shaking. "Tell them I didn't do anything. Tell them." Davenport stepped away from her, and for the first time all night, he looked ashamed. He wouldn't save her. He couldn't, because he knew, the moment those cops walked in, it was over. Claire realized it too. Her face twisted into something ugly. "You coward," she shrieked. But Davenport didn't even look at her. The church doors burst open. Officers flooded in, guns drawn. And as they grabbed Claire, pinning her to the floor, just as I had moments ago, I finally breathed again. Claire thrashed against the officers as they pinned her to the floor. "Get off me!" she screamed, her voice shrill, desperate. I didn't do anything. The officers ignored her. One pressed a knee in her back, snapping cuffs around her wrists. The same hands she once used to sign my death away. But I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was looking at Davenport. And for the first time since this nightmare started, he wouldn't meet my eyes. Something wasn't right. I stepped toward him, my fist still clenched. You knew this was coming, didn't you? My voice was low, dangerous. He swallowed. You stood by her side this whole time, I said, taking another step. Why? Davenport finally looked at me, and what I saw stopped me cold. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was fear. Buried secrets. Before I could say another word, one of the officers walked up to me. Mr. Carter? I turned to him, my pulse still racing. Yeah. The officer cleared his throat. We need you to come with us. I blinked. Excuse me. Another officer stepped forward, holding up a sealed evidence bag. And inside, a manila folder. A very familiar manila folder. The same one that Claire had hidden in her desk. The one that held every disgusting secret behind my accident. The officer's gaze was steady. We need you to look at something. The church fell silent again. I took the folder with trembling hands, ripped it open, and froze. My stomach dropped, because inside, it wasn't just details about Claire's plan. It was something much worse. A second set of documents, signed by someone else. And when I saw the signature at the bottom of the page, my entire world shattered. Graham Davenport. My breath hitched. No, this wasn't Claire's plan. This was his. She was just the executioner. The real mastermind behind my death was standing right in front of me. And the look in Davenport's eyes? He knew I knew. And suddenly, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. The evidence folder felt heavy in my hands, but not as heavy as the truth. I stared at Graham Davenport's signature, bold, clear, and undeniable. The real mastermind. The man who had spent years grooming me as his golden boy had, in reality, been the one pulling the strings behind my death. And now, as the officers dragged Claire away, he just stood there, calm, watching, as if this had all been an inconvenience. Something he could fix. I gritted my teeth. Say something. Davenport sighed, adjusting his cuffs. I should have burned those files. The room was dead silent. I took a slow step forward, gripping the folder so hard my knuckles turned white. You planned all of this, I whispered. Claire was just your pawn. Davenport tilted his head slightly. And what if she was? His tone was casual. Too casual. It made my blood boil. I trusted you. I seethed. He chuckled. I know. I lunged at him, but two officers stepped in my way, blocking me. Davenport just smirked. You don't get it, do you, Samuel? He said. You think this is over? He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I built you. I made you. And you think a few pieces of paper are enough to bring me down? My stomach twisted, because he was right. Davenport had spent decades cementing his power. Connections, money, influence. I had proof, but he had the system. And that meant he still had a way out. Then Davenport did something that made my blood run cold. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. And then, in a voice so low only I could hear, he said, "Work for me." My breath caught. What? He took another step forward, dropping his voice even more. I can fix this, he murmured. We both walk out of here clean. You get her life back. I get my investment secured. I just stared at him. He wanted me to go back to him? To pretend none of this ever happened? I shook my head, disgusted. You try to kill me. Davenport's smirk didn't fade. And yet, here you are. His meaning was clear. I survived once. I might not survive again. My pulse pounded. I had two choices. One, take his offer. Play the long game. Wait for my chance to take him down from the inside. Two, refuse and become his next loose end. And I only had seconds to decide. The air felt thick. Davenport's offer hung between us, laced with power, poison, and the weight of a noose tightening around my neck. Work for me. 3 words. 3 words that could either save my life or seal my fate. I glanced at the folder in my hands, the proof that he was behind everything. But proof meant nothing when the man you were fighting owned the system. Davenport gave a small, knowing smile. Tick-tock, Samuel. Make your choice. I could refuse. Call his bluff. Expose everything. But then what? The moment I walked out of here, I'd never be safe again. Davenport had connections in every sector. If he could fake my death once, he could make it permanent. And something told me that this time, he wouldn't fail. I could say yes. Pretend to side with him. Get close. Gather more dirt. Real dirt that could bury him for good. But it meant selling my soul to the devil. It meant pretending to be his golden boy again. I swallowed hard. Fine, I said. Davenport's smirk widened. But before he could say anything, I added, on my terms. Davenport arched an eyebrow. Oh, and what terms would those be? I forced my voice to stay steady. You clear Claire's name. Davenport laughed. Now, why would I do that? I narrowed my eyes. Because if she talks, she'll mention you. His smile faded just slightly. I pressed harder. If you throw her under the bus, she'll take you with her. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. She has nothing left to lose. Davenport's jaw tightened. Checkmate. Finally, he sighed. Fine, I'll handle it. I didn't believe him for a second, but I nodded anyway, because now I was playing my own game. And as of this moment, I had one goal. Take down Graham Davenport, no matter the cost. Davenport's smirk never wavered as he extended a hand toward me. Smart choice, Samuel. I stared at his outstretched palm. Shaking his hand felt like signing my own death warrant. But I had no choice. I clasped his hand, gripping it harder than necessary. His grin widened. Davenport turned to the officers. Gentlemen, I trust we can handle this internally? The lead officer, one of his men, no doubt, hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Claire, still restrained, thrashed wildly. No, you can't let him do this. Davenport gave her a pitying look. Oh, Claire, you should have known. His voice softened, almost mocking. You were never in control. Claire's face twisted in horror. The officers pulled her up, leading her away. Just like that, she was erased, and I had just taken her place. Walk with me, Davenport said smoothly, leading me toward the church doors. The second we stepped outside, a black car waited at the curb. Davenport gestured for me to enter. I slid in, my heart pounding. Once the door shut, Davenport leaned back, completely at ease. You understand how this works now, don't you? I kept my face blank. You make the rules. He nodded, pleased. And now, you're in the game. I let out a slow breath. No, I wasn't in his game. I was setting up my own. Because while Davenport thought he'd just secured his perfect pawn, I was about to become his biggest threat. The black car glided through the city like a shark cutting through water. Davenport sat beside me, utterly relaxed, because he thought he'd won. I kept my face neutral, calm, obedient, but inside, I was counting the minutes. Because tonight, the trap would spring. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single vibration. That was the signal. I had 1 hour. I glanced at Davenport. He was scrolling through his phone, completely at ease. He had no idea that right now, evidence was being leaked. His accounts, his connections, every illegal deal he ever made. And the best part? It looked like it came from him. The car pulled up to his private estate. Davenport stepped out first, his security detail watching me closely. Come, Samuel, he said. Tonight, we celebrate. I forced a smile. Of course. He led me inside, past marble columns and glass chandeliers. His world was built on power and deception. But tonight, it would crumble. We sat in his lavish dining room, a feast laid out before us. Davenport raised a glass. To new beginnings. I raised mine. To endings. I heard them before Davenport did. Faint, growing louder. The moment his phone buzzed, I knew he had finally seen it. The leaked files, the account transfers, the betrayal. His expression darkened. What have you done? I set my glass down. I ended this. Davenport lunged for me, but before he could reach me, boom, the doors burst open. FBI agents swarmed in, weapons raised. Davenport whirled, eyes wide in shock. No, his world was over. Checkmate. The agents flooded the room, guns drawn, moving with military precision. Davenport's face twisted in disbelief. You set me up? I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as he stumbled back, his mind racing, calculating his escape. But it was too late. He had no escape. I stood there, still, watching it all unfold. Davenport had spent years building his empire on deceit and control. Now, it was crumbling piece by piece. As the agents surrounded him, they shoved him into cuffs. One agent looked up at me. "Good job, Samuel. You helped us take him down." But my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't just helping the authorities. I was removing the final piece that had held me in his grasp for so long. The man who had faked my death, who had made me believe I was nothing but a puppet for his convenience. As Davenport was taken away in a squad car, I stood at the doorway of his mansion, the night air cold and sharp. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. No more puppeteer, no more strings. But as I watched the car disappear into the night, something nagged at me. What if there was more? What if there was someone else? I turned and walked back inside the mansion, past the wreckage of Davenport's power. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The mansion door shut behind me. But deep inside, I knew this story wasn't finished.